Fall is officially upon us, and if you are anything like me and are a mood reader, you are probably looking for some book recommendations that fit that fall vibe. For me, when I think of fall, I usually think of cozy, sort of warm book, but also some spooky books as well. This list of books is going to be some books in those genres. I primarily read fantasy books, so almost all of these books are going to be fantasy oriented. A cozy fantasy for me is like any book that kind of generates like feelings of warmth and comfort, whereas spooky fantasy would be more so things that focus on more darker elements. These would be books with such as vampires, witches, demons, so a bit more scary, more geared towards that more Halloween element. Books that might fall into the dark academia subgenre as well. So if any of those categories sound appealing to you, you might want to continue watching this video. The first one that I have here is called Where the Dark Stands Still, and this is by A.B. Pornick. This is a YA romantasy following a girl who goes into the enchanted forest to find this flower that will cure her of her magic, but she ends up stumbling upon this figure called the Leshy, who is sort of like a guardian of the woods. I didn't super love this book, but I did really enjoy the atmosphere around it. It has this like a sort of Slavic folklore sort of inspiration that I felt very like cozy, and I would recommend this one if those themes sound intriguing. Heartless Hunter by Kristen Ciccarelli. This is the first book in the Crimson Moth duology, which I feel like this is one of the more popular titles that I will be talking about. I really enjoyed this first one. We're following a character named Rune, who is a witch, and it is set in a world where witches are hunted, and she basically falls in love with one of the witch hunters who she has some connection to through a childhood friend. I really enjoyed this first one. I thought that Rune and Gideon had a very solid relationship, and I really liked the world building. The second book in this, which is called Rebel Witch, isn't my favorite book, but I do know that some people who enjoyed this one also enjoyed that second one, so I would still recommend this series. The Serpent and the Wings of Night by Carissa Broadbent. This is one that is more on that spooky end of things because it follows vampires. We're following a main female character named Araya, who is the adopted human daughter of the vampire king, who decides to compete in a competition that is hosted by the goddess Nyaxia, where the winner will receive some sort of reward. The world building in this is very interesting. This is also a series of 3 duologies, so there are separate like romances that you follow throughout the different books within this world. I have yet to read the second book, but that is one of the books that I would like to read this fall. Phantasma by Kaylie Smith. This is one of my favorite books that I read all of last year. This one we're following a main character named Ophelia, has recently lost her mother, and her sister basically enters this competition called Phantasma that is held in the spooky demonic manor, where people basically have to pass these different trials in order to get some sort of favor from the head of Phantasma, who is allegedly a demon. And basically she teams up with the mysterious phantom to sort of investigate what's going on in Phantasma and also to hopefully pass it. This one is, I think, pretty gory, and it's also a very spicy book as well, but I did really enjoy this story, and it's a like 500-page book, and I read this in one singular sitting and stayed up all night reading it. The second book, Enchantra, has also come out. I wasn't as big of a fan of it, but I still overall really enjoyed the series and will be continuing with it. This author also has another series that I believe is called A Ruinous Fate that I am also very interested in reading as well, because I believe it has witches, and I did enjoy the author's writing style. But that one is a YA series, so it won't have the same spicy content that Phantasma does, so if that is what you enjoyed with Phantasma, possibly that one might not be a good recommendation. The Wren and the Holly Library, and this is by K.A. Linde. In this one we're following a character who is sort of like a thief, and she is tasked with stealing something from this mysterious like monster guy. It's sort of set in like an alternative version of our own world where monsters do exist, and there are these treaties that regulate the relationship between monsters and humans, and by stealing this thing from the monster guy, she is actually violating these treaties and could eventually lead to the entire destruction of like civil order in their society. So there's some pretty high stakes, but the monster guy ends up making some sort of bargain with her where she is actually going to work with him and help him steal something else in return for granting her clemency. I think this one is really interesting. It is a romantasy one. It is a special edition that was published by Entangled Publishing. The second book in this also recently came out and I have yet to read it, but I am eagerly anticipating it and would highly recommend this one. House of Salt and Sorrows by Erin A. Craig. I honestly didn't really know what to expect going into this book because it is pitched as being a like 12 Dancing Princesses retelling, and when I think of 12 Dancing Princesses I think of the Barbie movie, so I really wasn't expecting this one to be as dark as it was, but I did really enjoy the sort of darkness that the author brought into this world. We're following one of the sisters named Annalay who has watched multiple of her sisters die. There's a lot of questions about whether or not the family is cursed and what's going on, and then there's also some more fantastical elements. I would consider some horror elements to it, so I would be aware of that if you were kind of jumping into this one blind, to be prepared for some more darker, scary themes, so maybe don't read it late at night. But I really enjoyed this one. There's also a sequel to it called House of Roots and Ruin that I actually enjoyed more than I liked this one, and we're following a different one of the sisters, which I'm not going to say who it is because that would be a spoiler. I think we're going to get a third book in it sometime soon, and I do believe Erin A. Craig is coming out with another book that I believe is going to be a retelling of the Scottish Ballad of Tamlin, which if you've read the ACOTAR series is also the basis behind Tamlin, the character. I am very interested in reading that one, and I think it has something to do with Canadian history as well. As a Canadian myself, I'm very interested in how she's going to do that, and I think this book, its sequel, speak to her talents as a writer. Sorcery of Thorns by Margaret Rogerson, a book that I really enjoyed. We're following a main character named Elizabeth who has spent her whole life secret, almost like magical library that she was like orphaned at and sort of been raised to be a protector of this library. They have to keep these magical grimoires that can turn into like beasts almost, make sure that they don't get out, and basically one of these super powerful grimoires escapes the control, and so Elizabeth has to team up with this charismatic sorcerer by the name of Nathaniel Thorn that she has a bit of rivalry with. I think this one is a very good like enemies to lovers story. I really love the world building in it. The plot is a little bit predictable, but I still thought it was really enjoyable. I really loved Elizabeth as a main character, and I loved Nathaniel as well. They're one of my favorite book couples, and I just absolutely adore these characters, their relationship. The world building and the magic I think was a really interesting take. If you know about warlocks from D&D, that might give you a little bit of an insight into what the magic system is like in this. So it has a very spooky element. There is also a short novella that goes with it, which is called The Mysteries of Thorn Manor, which is also really fun, and I think it was more into that cozy vibe because this is one that I would really recommend. On a similar note, I think one of Margaret Rogerson's other books, which is called Vespertine, also fits this bill. We're following a main character named Artemisa who has been like cursed by this ancient spirit that is like bound to a relic that she ends up getting these like magical powers from. So I really enjoyed that element of the story, and I really liked Artemisa as a main character. I've seen some discussion online about whether or not she is a neurodivergent, specifically autistic coded character, and as someone who is autistic myself, I actually do see a lot of those similarities. I also see some of those similarities in Elizabeth from A Sorcery of Thorns as well. I don't know if that was necessarily the author's intention, but I do think that if you are an autistic person or a neurodivergent person and you are looking for characters who might be more similar to you, this is a great recommendation. I also love the world building in it as well. Artemisa sort of belongs to the order of secret nuns almost that have these different roles and responsibility in their society, and I thought that that was really well done and well built. The only caveat to this one, there was meant to be a sequel to it, and I believe the author has said as for now that she's not writing it. So I still feel like this one does have a pretty solid conclusion to it. Like the main questions and motivations behind the plot are answered, but I still had had some questions about it. I actually love for this series to be continued, but I don't know if that's going to happen. But it is still one that I think is enjoyable as a standalone. But Belladonna by Adalyn Grace, this is a very interesting sort of romance story where we're following a main character named Signa, who is the sole survivor of her family after a mysterious event happened which killed everyone in her household that she survived as a baby. And Signa has now found out that she is actually immune to death. So Signa has also been haunted by the shadow of death, with most of the guardians that she's been put into the care of having died of mysterious circumstances. Is about 17, almost 18. She's about to come into her inheritance, and she gets once again carted off to another set of mysterious relatives where she finds out that her relative has actually recently passed away, and that her young daughter is also dying. With her own sort of immunity to death, decides to take up the mantle of being the detective to help and save her cousin. I really loved the relationship between Signa and her cousin. Romance was also really interesting, and I liked this sort of lore behind it. There isn't as much like world building, so it's not as like fantasy leaning as some of the other books, but it does still have these sort of fantastical elements that I think a lot of readers would really enjoy. Foxglove King by Hannah Witten, following a main character named Lore, who also has the powers over death magic that's called Mortem in this world. People who have Mortem powers are sort of hunted by the established like ruling elite. Our main character is forced on the run for most of her life. After like an incident gone wrong, she actually ends up being captured by the king, who instead of executing her for her magic, decides to actually introduce her to his court and use her to accomplish his own aims. This one also has a romance plotline in it, and I really enjoyed this series overall. I did like this first book more than the second one, and then the third book I have yet to read as it only came out very recently, but I would like to get to it soon. But this is one that I would 100% recommend. I really love the world building in it. The magic system is really unique, and it's also inspired by the French sort of history of the Ancien regime. So there's a very big and illustrious, almost glittering court that I think is a really intriguing premise. So this is one that I would highly recommend. Kingdom of the Wicked by Carrie Maniscalco. In this one, we're following a main character named Amelia, whose twin sister is found dead, and Amelia has to basically team up with a demon prince named Wrath to try and figure out what happened to her sister. Amelia and Vittoria were also witches, so there's a lot of like magical elements in this book, and the magic's like built around their family history as well. So like they run a restaurant, so like cooking is like a big thing in their family. This one is also portal type fantasy. There are two different worlds, one which is our own world where Amelia is living, and then the sort of hells that the Prince Wrath is from. There are two more books in this series, and then there's also a spin-off, Throne of the Fallen. I'm also very intrigued in because it is exploring more of the Princes of Hell. So this is a series that I've been meaning to continue for a long time. If you are specifically looking for more adult recommendations, you might possibly be able to skip over this trilogy, but considering that I already own the books, I would like to read these ones before I continue to the other series. The Spell Shop by Sarah Beth Durst. This is a more cozy leaning fantasy. As you can probably tell by the cover, this is one of my favorite covers. So like warm and inviting, and I feel like really encapsulates those kind of like cozy fall vibes. This one, we're following a main character who is a librarian at this like magical library where there has been some sort of revolution where the people in power have been overthrown. So she basically escapes with a bunch of these important magical books back to live at her home island, where she does eventually set up this little informal spell shop to kind of use the magic of these books to try and help out the people of the island as well. So I really like the cozy vibes to this one. This one also I do feel like has a bit of a higher stakes to it than most cozy fantasy, as there is a lot of issues around how magic is being used. So actual stakes to the plot, but it is largely a more cozy oriented story. Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldree. This one, we're following a orc barbarian who wants to set up the first ever coffee shop in this world. And the world is highly inspired by something like Dungeons and Dragons, where there's a lot of different fantasy races. Our secondary female character is called Tandri, and she is a succubus, and so there's a lot of discussion about how the different races are treated in this world, largely just about the average everyday experience of trying to set up this coffee shop. There's also a prequel to this called Bookshops and Bone Dust, which is a prequel following Viv as she, injured and forced to stay in this little seaside town, helps set up the library there. So if you're looking for that more book-oriented, Bookshops and Bone Dust might be a better recommendation to go to. I feel like you can read them in either order. And then there is a third book in this series that is set to come out sometime later this year, The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches. This one is following a main character named Mika Moon, who is basically a witch, but it's set in our own world, so like witches, people don't really think they like exist. And Mika has online platform where she posts like witchcraft videos, and she ends up being found by this group of individuals who run a boarding house for witches. Because in this world, most witches actually end up as orphans. Mika kind of has to take on the responsibility of like teaching these 3 young girls about magic. So it has a very like cozy sort of vibe to it in terms of like learning about their magic and also learning about accepting one another and found family elements. So if you are interested in more of that cozy fantasy, that would be another recommendation. Another one that I really liked was called Legends and Librarians. In this one, we're following a main character who has sort of like dreamed her whole life of being able to go back to her hometown and revitalize her childhood library. And she does this with the help of adventurer from the city who they kind of start a little romance. Find out that the library that they want to revitalize has been taken over by these sort of like library spirits. It has a magic system that is highly based around books and reading, which I think is really interesting for readers themselves. Forged by Magic. This one we're following a half-orc who kind of works for this like tyrannical king until she gets like shipwrecked on this like abandoned island and ends up meeting this blacksmith, and he recruits her to help out with winning this annual competition that they do on their island. So it has that more classic quest adventure type fantasy thing while also having a sort of like cozier low stakes vibe. There's also more books in the series as well. Forest King's Daughter by Ellie Blake, set in forest type environment, so that's why it reminds me a lot of like the fall. And we're following a main character named Cassia, who when she was younger had befriended a young boy from the like ancient enemy of her people. He gave her this ring that has these special magical powers, and she has for the past couple of decades been training to use these powers under the jurisdiction of her father. However, something happens where she ends up reuniting with the boy, and slowly the two of them start uncovering more about the history behind this magical ring and also just the history of the world at large. I think this was a really interesting book. I love the world building in it. I do think there were some pacing issues, but it is still overall one that I think a lot of people would enjoy. Serpent and Dove, and this is by Shelby Mahurin, following a witch in a world where witches are hunted, and she falls in love with a witch hunter who she is forced into an arranged marriage with after a sort of incident of public indecency, to say the least. I love these two characters together. It was very funny, and it was not a book that takes itself too seriously, so if you're into that more enjoyable fantasy, this one would be one that I recommend. I don't like the continuation of this series as much as I enjoyed this first one, but it does end on a cliffhanger, which makes you want to read the rest of them, but in my opinion, the series does kind of go downhill from, but I still really enjoyed this first book and hold a lot of fondness for it. It is a YA and is a bit more silly, so do be prepared for that and don't go in expecting like some super serious story. One Dark Window by Rachel Gillig. In this one, sort of similar to Vespertine, which I mentioned earlier, we're following a main character named Elspeth, who also has this sort of mysterious nightmare type figure living in her mind. In this world, children with magic are hunted hunted down and are killed, they usually go through some period of illness where afterwards they develop magic, and Elspeth has mainly lived her life hidden away by her family. After some certain events, she finds herself making a deal with this mysterious highwayman to find out more about the magic in this world, and so they set off on this task to collect the different what are called Providence cards, which are sort of these magical cards similar to tarot cards, where each one has its different powers. To collect all of the Providence cards to fulfill the prophecy that will hopefully cure the world of the blight and sickness that has infected it. The Darkness Within Us by Trisha Levenseller. This is actually the sequel to another book which I believe is called The Shadows Between Us, but I personally like this one better, and they each follow two sisters, but this one we're following a character named Chrysantha, who has been, most of her life was like the older, prettier daughter, and she basically married off to a wealthy but horrid and old rich man. She, at the beginning of this book, is left as a widow and has now inherited the title and wealth of her late husband, and her plots become foiled when said late husband's mysterious grandson arrives. He has a lot more secrets than he might be hiding behind a very, very handsome exterior. I really loved this one. It was another one that I read in like one singular sitting because I was so invested in the plot line. I love the romance and the chemistry between these characters. I also think the first one in the series is good as well, but I didn't enjoy it as much. The male main character in it is basically the sort of traditional shadow daddy, and I don't know, sometimes I just don't like those books as much because they're a bit more formulaic and predictable, whereas in this one I felt like the male main character had a bit more of a unique spin on things than one, and it's also got some beautiful artwork. This is the Fairy Loot exclusive edition of it, so would highly recommend The Glittering Edge by Alyssa Valere. Recently read this one following a main character named Penny, and her mother has recently gotten into an accident that she finds out is actually correlated to a curse that was put on one of the other families in this town where everyone they love will die. Penny has to team up with the two younger members of these feuding families, the one that has the curse and the one that made the curse. And so I think this one is really interesting. There is a sort of little bit of a love triangle going on, but I do think there is a very clear relationship that does emerge from it, so it doesn't bother me as much as some other love triangles do. This is also the Fairy Loot edition, so it has some like special design features, but I really enjoyed this one. It's not the most but I did really enjoy the characters and their relationships and thought that the plot was well done, and so was the world building for the story. I also have a couple of additional books that are on my TBR or to be read list. Long Live Evil by Sarah Reese Brennan. This one is following a character that basically gets transported into one of her favorite novels. I think that seems like a really interesting concept, and she's actually put into sort of the body of the villain in this story. So I'm really interested to see how the author plays with that aspect of like a meta-narrative. The Scarlet Veil. This is by Shelby Mahurin, and it's actually a sequel or spin-off series to the Serpent and Dove series, so I am really interested in this one, and we're following one of the characters that's introduced in there, and I believe there's some aspect of her having a little bit of a romance with a vampire. It's called Never the Roses by Jennifer Lambert. This one we're following like a mysterious sorceress, spent her life fighting in these different wars, and I similar to Long Live Evil goes on a bit of a villain arc, and there is some sort of romance between her and I think the king that she ends up working for. Study and Drowning by Ava Reed. I have a lot of Ava Reed's books, so I do need to get to reading them soon. This one I believe we're following a main character named Effie who lives in a world where women are denied access to higher education, and she is trying to make some sort of a name for herself within academia. It has something to do with her designing a house for one of her favorite authors who is recently deceased, and there's some mystery around the author. And Bonesmith by Nikki Plau-Preto. Eve is set in like a world where there's houses that have different like powers, and it's kind of more of like a death sort of magic system. I don't know too much about it, but I am very intrigued by this cover. It has haunted sort of skeletons in the back, and I've heard good reviews from this. People have said that that it reminds them of the Night's Watch from Game of Thrones, and Game of Thrones is one of my favorite series of all time. The Night Hunt by Alexandra Christo, and this one I have read her other book that's called To Kill a Kingdom, which is sort of like Little Mermaid retelling. We're following a sort of villainous heroine as well. She's like this sort of like spooky monster, and I think harvests the souls of men or something like that, and I think she ends up falling in love with one of the people that she is supposed to kill. So I'm very interested in that. That was also a theme in the To Kill a Kingdom book, which had our main character have her magic that was sort of locked behind killing her one true love. Bring Me Your Midnight by Rachel Griffin. I think it's an arranged marriage trope, and there's something to do a seafaring type magic, and I believe she is like a part of a coven of witches, so I'm very intrigued. Harvest of Hearts by Andrea Eames, following a main character who has part of her heart stolen by a sorcerer and basically has to go on this quest to retrieve it. This says that it's inspired by Howl's Moving Castle, which while I have read the book, I didn't really like the book. I actually enjoyed the movie more, but I am still intrigued by how this book is going to play with those similar themes. Doing The Witch Queen by Stephanie Burgess, following a witch queen who I think falls in love with her like head librarian, who's sort of this like super nerdy guy, and I'm really interested in how that relationship is going to play out between these characters. I love these sort of more villainous heroines, and I love seeing that become a more popular trope. Arcana Academy by Elise Kova, following a main character named Clara, who a legal inker of tarot cards, and she gets caught by the prince, who ends up being the headmaster of this place called Arcana Academy, and so she is basically recruited by him to attend this school and also at the same time pose as his fiance. I'm really interested in this. I really love Elise Kova's Married to Magic series. We're looking for one that fits the kind of like fall vibes. I think a duel with the Vampire Lord might be spooky season coded, but I'm hoping that this one will also have similar elements to what I enjoyed in her previous book. The Vampire Queen by Katie Robert. I feel like Katie Robert is sort of one of the more notorious spicy authors, so to speak, so I am very intrigued by the premise of her books, but I am kind of hesitant to dive into them because I'm not super big on spicy books, but a lot of the reviews that I have seen for her books have tended to be very positive, so I'm very interested in this. It also has a very interesting artwork on the back. Color Me Intrigued. Dagger in the Flame by Catherine Doyle. This one I believe we're following a main character whose mother was recently killed, and she ends up joining one of the gangs within her city and has like a sort of romance with one of the rival members of the gang. I feel like this one kind of has a Romeo and Juliet-esque quality to it that I don't know if other people feel is very fall coded, but I feel for some reason Romeo and Juliet is very fall coded. Field of Sparrows by Devney Perry. Devney Perry is a romance author, and this is her romantasy debut, and I believe we're following a main character who finds herself in an arranged marriage that was originally intended for her sister. And so her sister has sort of been raised with this sort of destiny in mind, and our main character is sort of very confused about this change of events. And there's also some aspect monsters in the world, and I believe they have to make some sort of sacrifice to these monsters that might have something to do with her marriage. So I am very interested in this one. It's also a very nice edition. Drowning Tide by Alison Saff. I've read 2 books by Alison Saff before. Her first one, which is it's called Down Comes the Night. I didn't personally enjoy that one, but I really enjoyed her other book, which A Fragile Enchantment, I feel like is more spring coded. We're following like a main character, a sorceress who enchants clothing, and she's tasked with making the wedding outfits for the crown prince and ends up actually falling in love with the crown prince. This one I feel like has a sort of similar forbidden love type component. We're following like 2 characters who are like rival academic on quest together and end up kind of like falling in love. I am cautiously optimistic though, because I didn't like the first book, and A Fragile Enchantment, I don't know if that was like a fluke or not yet, so I'm hoping that I will still enjoy this one. But I'm also not a huge fan of this design. This is like the Illumicrate exclusive edition. It's probably one of my least favorite that they've done. I believe that brings us to the end of this video. Hope that at least you can get 1 or 2 recommendations from this list. Also, if you have read any of these books, feel free to let me know, and also let me know about your thoughts about them. Let me know if there are any here that you think are interesting, or if there are any that you would like to hear me talk more about, as I think the majority of books that I did talk about are ones that I have read. So I hope that you enjoyed this video and got at least a few recommendations from it. And so thank you so much again for watching, and goodbye.